All right, folks. So today, this lesson is going to look at what's called the executive department heads, specifically the role of the executive branch, and not just the President of the United States, but also a group of people that he calls the cabinet, or that the President calls the cabinet, and also the group of people that are run by the cabinet called something the executive departments. So these are the two key things to look at today: the cabinet and then the executive departments and what they go into overall as far as everything that happens. So the biggest thing is there more to the executive branch than just the president? Yes, there is. Okay, that's the kind of misconception that people have, as the president runs the entire executive branch. The president is most definitely at the top of the executive branch, but there are thousands of more jobs that go into the executive branch than just the president of the United States. So what we're going to look at again, guys, is this idea of the departments, the agencies that are all headed up by something called the presidential cabinet. So these are basically the people that the president has chosen to run his branch of the United States government and to keep the business of America running as time would go on throughout all of these different things. So on this next one, we'll talk about the job of the executive branch and what it's supposed to do, and then we'll talk about the members of the cabinet a little bit after. So what you have here, guys, at least at this particular point, is the executive branch is set up of 15 different departments. Okay, all have 15 different departments, different areas that basically go into it. We're not going to go into each individual one today. You guys can see that in another different lesson, as everything else basically happens. So you've got the president up here at the top. He's got his executive departments and agencies. The people that run these departments are a member of a cabinet. Okay, so these departments basically focus on one specific job. Like if you're worried about education, there's a Department of Education, there's a Department of Transportation, there's a Department of Defense, there's a Department of Energy. So each one of these 15 different departments have different agencies and people that literally make this country work and run. So these are basically the people that are on the ground floor doing everything at every given point in time at this particular point. So each one of these agencies and each one of these departments have a head called the Secretary of whatever, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Transportation. Those secretaries are members of the cabinet. Those are the 15 individuals that the President of the United States picks to run those departments and run those different areas. Those are called cabinet level positions. All right, secretary of all these other different kinds of things. So what happens is these secretaries, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education, they basically report to these agencies and say, hey, this is what I want done. This is how we're going to enforce these laws, everything else that basically happen at any given point in time. So that's the basic idea. You have the president on top, the department and the agencies, with the cabinet right there in the middle, kind of the middleman area. So we're just going to kind of look at some of these things here, true or false for everything else. The executive branch includes only the president, definitely false. Each government department has a leader called a secretary, that's true. The 15 department heads are all part of the president's cabinet, that's also true. The president cabinet is a group of people who guard the president, absolutely false on that particular one. Government agencies only make rules, false. Agencies enforce the rules, they do not make the rules. Some parts of the executive branch are businesses that government owns. Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. There are government-run companies that fall underneath these agencies. TVA would definitely fall under the Department of Energy, Tennessee Valley Authority with hydroelectric power. That's a government-owned agency. The president has total control over independent agencies. That actually is false. Even though he can tell the cabinet and everything else what to do, the independent agencies are just that. They are independent, at least at this given point in time. So they don't have complete control over these. And then number 8, enforcing laws can include educating the public, catching lawbreakers, taking people to court. Absolutely, those are all parts of enforcing the rules as you go. When Congress passes a law, the law includes every detail how it must be carried out. That is false. This is the job of the president to determine how laws are going to be basically enforced. Most of the work done in the executive branch is carried out by the president. False. Most of the work done there is by the agencies who are directed by the cabinet. Regulations are executive branch rules that have the power of laws. True. All right, you have different regulations that have other roles that go along with it. A big role of the executive branch is to keep the nation safe, absolutely 100% without a doubt, because the cabinet instructs different departments, Homeland Department of Security, Department of Defense, all right, all these other different kinds of areas that fall underneath that category. So a lot of different moving parts as far as these things go. You have these different acronyms and stuff that make up the different parts of the executive branch overall. So you had the Department of Justice. That was one of the major departments. And then you had like the FBI, the DEA, that are all underneath that same department. So this is what you get, guys, as far as this. You have a department. You have these agencies. The department is headed up by a member of the cabinet called the secretary. And then you also have the president who's over the cabinet. That's the basic concept of how these. So here's some more acronyms you can kind of break down in that little reading as far as what you have. As you've seen, 15 members of the cabinet. Each one has a secretary who's in charge. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about this, that what goes into it, at least at this particular point in time. So if you're the secretary of these, this is what you need. Secretary blank, more investment into electricity. That would be an example of energy. Secretary of what? We saw a decrease in highway deaths. So if it's talking about highways, it's probably talking about transportation. Secretary of blank security. This is a new one. This is Homeland Security. This is the newest department that was created after 9/11 in 2001. Secretary of the blank. It's time to take the penny out of circulation. Treasury has to deal with money. And then beetles in the national forest. That would be agriculture. For everything else as long as that goes into it. So those, again, guys, are the head and 5 different departments that make up the 15 parts of the cabinet and the departments of the executive branch. So when you're looking at this, guys, on this one, you have different topics up here at the top, like educational assistance. That would be kind of Department of Education. So you've got some different topics here and some different ideas. Which one of these would these fall under, at least at this particular point in time? So that's a little quiz there in the middle of this. What's the difference between regulation and enforcement? Okay, so regulation is just basically no changes and making sure things stay the same. Enforcement is some change to the rules. So this is where people get a little bit confused. Regulation is you just keep things the same, all right? But you guarantee that it's always going to stay that way. Enforcement is, hey, you change up a couple of different tweaks to a rule here and there. Like say if you have dress code, maybe your school or wherever you are doesn't allow shorts for any reason. So then maybe they change the enforcement saying, okay, you can allow shorts, but you can't allow shorts that are basically above the knee. So you have different changes to how that works. That's what the enforcement part is versus regulation, at least at this particular point in time. Then you have some other ones here, Department of Labor. Which one would have to do with the Department of Labor? Anything that has to do with jobs and everything else, that's what it has to deal with. All right, what is enforcement regulation? Again, if you're looking at the changes and all this in enforcement regulation, you're looking at this idea of like, hey, something is evaluating something, so hey, we're looking at the process right now. If there's a change, that's enforcement. All right, so you got like monitor, evaluate, educate, and those things are like, hey, those are just regulation. Enforcement would be like employees must do this, must do that, all that stuff. Okay, so that's another key difference there to make sure we understand all this. All right, so then you can use that to write down this. Why do you think it's important to learn about the executive branch? I will give you guys a little bit of a tip as far as this. Okay, so the legislative branch, those are the people that pretty much create the laws and some other stuff we talked about before. This branch is the actual branch that runs the country on the ground. These are the actual individuals, guys, that say that take all these rules that are created by the Congress and legislative branch and say, okay, these are the rules that we have in place. How are we going to enforce them? Who are we going to enforce them upon? What are we going to do as far as all that different kinds of stuff? So this is the critical thing as far as the executive branch and the cabinet. The cabinet is kind of like the middle management group. The president's kind of like the owner, and then the agencies are kind of like the regular common day workers that do everything at this particular point in time. So this branch is extremely critical because these are the people that you actually stare at and see the actual changes that happen in our country with new laws and new changes as far as everything else. So there's a short little quiz here. Executive branch is the largest branch of our government. Absolutely 100% true. Has literally thousands of people that are involved in this at this particular point in time. The purpose of the executive branch, again, is to carry out laws passed by the legislative branch. The executive branch is only the president. 100% false on that one. Most of the executive branch is made up of departments and independent agencies. Yes, that is true. The executive agency with the image right here, Farm Security and Rural Investment. So that has to do with farming, agriculture. Agency most likely to execute this act, the Clean Air Act. So that has to basically do, excuse me, with this. And here's a keyword there, agency, that goes along with all those other different kinds of questions as well as this particular point. Okay, so this last part, guys, this is just saying if you want to be a part of the executive branch, what agency would you want to be a part of and why? Same thing there as far as this stuff. And then at the end, as we basically look at, tell me, or at least tell your teacher, do you have some issues with this? Do you still have questions? Do we still have a couple different things we need to work out? All right, so that is the cabinet, the executive branch and its departments, and what goes into it, which, again, is a crucial branch for the United States government.